Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Sanhedrin daf Nun Gimel. We are going to begin on Nun Beis Mud Beis by the new Mishnah at the bottom. It says the Masnis and Mitzvahs Hanechnokin. What is the mitzvah of strangulation? Hayu mashkin oisu b'zevel. So they're going to put this person into fertilizer ad archavaisav, up into his knees, which is the same thing as we said by sreifa. When nice and suda kashal haraka, the karich al savarai. We put around his neck these two kerchiefs, same as sreifa. Each one pulls, but instead of just pulling gently so his mouth can open, you pull harder until he dies. Says Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. The pasuk says ish, and this is referring to Eishes ish, prat l'katan. It's coming to exclude if it's a boy, then he does not have the punishment because he's not a bardas, so he's not going to be chayiv. Asher yinof es eishes ish, that he was mazana, he committed adultery with a married woman, pral eishes katan. Says Rashi, ashmiinan the katan ein lo kedushin, because in the event where it's an eishes kayin, the wife eishes katan, if her husband is a katan, so says Rashi, katan ein lo kedushin. A boy who's a katan can't do kedushin, so it's not chal. It's therefore that's not considered to be eishes ish. Eishes re'ehu, what is that? Pral eishes acherim. So it's eishes re'ehu, your friend's wife, excluding the wife of others. What exactly that means, says Rashi, for example, kuti. Hashmin and chain kedushin l'kuti. There's no kedushin for it. Okay. Mois yumos. So what is the death penalty for eishes ish? It's bechenek. The punishment is chenek. So ata oimer bechenek u'inawel ba'achas mikol misa somewhere b'tayra. Maybe it's some other death penalty. How do you know it's chenek? So amrit kol makom shenemer misa b'tayra stam. Whenever it just says misa but doesn't specify, it's logical. We have arba misais, and the most kal of the four is chenek. So the Torah doesn't specify, so we can't give someone a bigger punishment than they deserve, so therefore we give them the smallest punishment of chenek. Rabbi Yonasan Aimer, Lomim Neshihi Kala, not because of that reason, Ella Kol Misa Hamur Batayra Stam Enu El Chenek. He actually holds that there's a reason why that's the din, that the punishment is chenek. It's not because we don't know. It's no. Whenever the Torah says misa, it is referring to chenek. And this is going to be explained, obviously, but that's what he says. Rabbi Yomer Nemar misa b'di shemayim and Nemar misa b'di adam. It says misa by b'di shemayim. It says in Bereshis v'yomos gam oisoi. And that's b'di shemayim. So ma misa amor b'di shemayim misa she'ein bo roisham. When it comes to Hashem enacting a misa, there's a misa which there's no bruises and there's no marks on the body. Af misa amor b'di adam misa she'ein bo roisham. So whenever, because by misa b'di shemayim it's a misa which you cannot see anything physically harm the body, so too when it comes to misa b'di adam, it's the same thing, which can only be chenek. Sai, if you're cutting, skila, you're hitting the guy with rocks, so he's getting bruises all over his body. And sreifa is questionable because it's internal, but you can imagine, obviously, it's going to cause problems as well. It's going to be burning him up and something like that. Okay, it's a shtickle kasha why sreifa is not in that category. Okay. So ma misa amor b'di shemayim misa she'ein bo roisham ma misa amor b'di adam misa she'ein bo roisham ve'ema sreifa. So Taka can say, how about sreifa, right? That's the kasha. Midyam rachmana bas kaim b'sreifa mechal dahal la bas sreifa. So the truth is, even though sreifa is also something which is normally she'ein bo roisham, because as we saw in yesterday's daf, it's only affects the neshama, the inside, but not the guf, not the body outside. So therefore, maybe you would think taka would include sreifa. No, because by bas kain it specifies sreifa. So why does it have to specify? If it was sreifa anyway, then just say misa, and we'd give everyone sreifa. Because only bas kain is sreifa, everyone else is la bas sreifa. That's the answer. Let's look at question 9. V'nolam de misa stam hamur b'tayra hi b'chenek. So one is Lamadi Mechenek Kala Makula and Hanamisham Deina to Rishal Hachmir Minasavik, as we said. But it's possible, like Shitas Rav Shimon, that Chenek is not the most kal, because then according to that, maybe you should give Harag. Leidach Man Diermer Mamatsinu Misa B'di Shemayim Shein Bo Raishim Af Misa Amur B'di Adam the Sreifa Loi Midahoitze Kostabas Kayin L'Sreifa. They put that in parentheses, which I guess means you didn't have to answer that. Okay. Let's look at question TB3. So which is the same question as question 9. This is TB3. And this is what it says. That's what I wrote. Chenek hi kala mikol dal misais. L'chein hamisa stam sarach liyos hakala mebekulam. Kishem b'misa b'di shemayim ein shem raisham gav misa b'di adam shlo b'loy raisham. Shu chenek. And I wrote parentheses because I knew the question already, probably, right? Vo loyman b'bas kain shehi b'sreif. Okay. All right, there you go. All right, let's keep on going now. All right. So we now continue to our daf. Nun gimel madaf. The bishlam Rav Yonason. I can understand the shita of Rav Yonason, who said that it's the most. It's not because it's the most kal, but he says it's because that's what the Torah means, right? So, Kidikam Afarish Rabbi Taimon, he explains the reason because of this Gzer Shavar, the comparison to Misa B'di Shemayim. El Rabbi Shaya Mamai Di Ikachenek Ba'oilam Ema Seifa. How do we know this Misa even exists in Beis Din? Maybe it's only Saif. How does he know the Chenek exists? So Amar Rava Arba Misos Gamar Gemirlu, because it's a tradition that there's 4, and this is one of them. So my Lom Imeshihi Kala. What exactly does that mean? Kimifli Bapluta Rav Shimon Rabbanon. So it's totally again on this machlokis Rav Shimon Rabbanon, as we said. What is the most makel? So if you hold that Chenek is the most makel, so there you can have that answer. But if you don't believe that Chenek is the weakest of the Arba Misos, you think Hereg is more kal, so then you should give Hereg. And that's the whole problem. So it's totally not machlokas. Rab Zeu Abaya Sharan is Skolin. So he says like this. So when it comes to other cases in which the death penalty is skila, skila doesn't mention anything about skila. The Gamirim Oivi Adaini, and because we learn everything out from Oivi Adaini, which is skila. So B'mai Gamiri, but Mois Yumsu, where do we learn it out? Mois Yumsu. So Gamir Oim B'demei Bum Gamiri. So how do they learn it out? They learn it from Mois Yumsu, or is it from B'demei Bum? Or Malay B'demei Bum. B'demeihim Demeim Bum Gamiri. That's how you learn it. Because the Iba Mois Yumsu Gamri, if they would learn it out from that you shall certainly die, which is not very clear, Demeim Lumli, then why would you need that Gzer Shav anyway? Elamai, but Demeihim Gamri, so that's how you learn out Sharnis Skolin from Yovi Adoni from this Demeim. So Mos Yumsu Lumli. So why does it have to say that? Because it's Tanya. Mos Yumos Hamaka Rotseahu. That the one who is a murderer will be sentenced to death, which of course is Saif. We only know if the Beis Din has the ability to punish him with the correct of the Arba Misos. That's what they do. How do we know that they're able to really do any of the Misos? So the pasuk is a reboy to say that even though it's true we prefer to do as prescribed the misa for the particular crime, but if not, then we can also do others. So because if you learn out from Mos Yumsu, my kakashali is one of the questions. So you can ask kash my yeshasish. The basic veligmer Mos Yumos miyavi adaini malham eskila avkan eskila. which we know is not true. So because we know that the only punishment of skila is dafka by namarasa. But if she was a nesua, then at that point when she's already married commits eishes ish, then the punishment is not skila, it's chenek. The elamake of the imoy kakashale. The kasha is that because we would never have thought by eishes ish that the punishment would be skila, because we know it's not, because it's the Torah specifies by a namarasa it's skila. The elamake of the imoy kakashale. Why don't we learn out from Oivi Adaini? So maybe maybe we should learn from Eishes Ish that the punishment is not skill, but the punishment is chenek. Because again, if you have two possibilities, maybe we should give them skila, maybe we should give them chenek. So we're going to do the more makel, and everyone holds chenek is more makel than skila. It's actually the consciousness in general. How do we know that we give everyone else skila? How do we know? The question is, how do we know when all these other misas, which we're going to see in this next Mishnah, that the punishment is skila all across the board? Again, we went out from Oivi Adaini, which does specify skila, but the question is, how do we know all the other ones are skila? Maybe the other ones are chenek. Next Mishnah. So now we have a long list. So we went through what are the actual death penalties, and now we're going to see what are the crimes for committing skila. Says the next Mishnah. Says Masti Elohin and a skull. So we have a long list. Habal aim, a person who has relations with his mother, in which I'd be happy to throw the first stone. Vyal Eishes Av, which the Adam do, of course. Vyal Eishes Av, your father's mother, which father's wife rather, which means it's not your mother, it's your stepmother. Vyal Hakala, your daughter-in-law. Vyal Zohar, on Mishko Zohar. Vyal Behema, cohabiting with an animal. Vayisham Aviyas a Behema, whether it's a man with a behema or a woman with a behema. V'megadif, a blasphemer. V'ovid, as we know, someone who worships idols by themselves. A person who gives his child over to moilech as avodah zara. The question is, exactly what does that mean? Pashut Shah is he actually kills his own kids. Ubal Oivi Adaini, which again is the key one of idol worship. Specific Oivi Adaini, using bones, putting on your arm or in your mouth to be in sorcery and to be able to speak to the dead or something along those lines. The Gemara is going to elaborate on that eventually. Mechalos Shabbos, which everyone knows that's Chil Shabbos is skila, which just gives you an unbelievable thing. Shabbos is so chomer that it's the most severe punishment, equated to what is kachavim and megadef. Mekal aviv imoi, someone who curses his parents. Vaboal naira marasa, we've said this many times. Naira dafka by erisin, but nesuin is chenek. Vamesis vamediach, someone who causes other people to worship avodah zara, whether an individual or a multitude. So again, if a person is on oived avodas kachavim, you also get skila. But when it comes to an ir nidachas, that whole city, they don't get skilled, they get saif. It's not as severe because they have been enticed. They're still punished, but not on the same level as a mesis or mediach. And mesis also, as we saw, there's no din hasra by them. And also, we're happy to have people judge them like a sris, or people that just don't have mercy, so that they're not going to find reasons to find them innocent. Machashiv, witchcraft. Uben Saramayra, which we're going to designate an entire parak to that. Short parak, but a parak. Habal aim. So, person is tashmish with his mother. Chayvela mishum aim umishum eshasav. Why we're going to kill him twice? This is obviously talking about. There's a bunch of Rashis over here. It says Rashi b'shoygeg chayvela hashteicha tois. So, obviously, if you're chayv misa and you get skila, that's it. You're not going to stone you twice. Can't kill you twice. But if it was b'shoygeg, okay, in that situation, you have to bring 2 chatois. Says Taisus, hadaloi katani eshasish mishum dahachal acher misari. So if it's after, let's say, l'achar misa, So your father already died, so it's still your mother, and it's your father's wife. Why is it Eishes Av? Because it was your father's wife, so it's still Eishes Av. Yehuda Omer Eno Chayav El Mishum Ha'em Bilvad. No, you're only chayav for your mother. Habal Eishes Av. On the other hand, if a person is boil, not your mother, but your father's wife, your stepmother, Chayav Mishum Eishes Av and Mishum Eishes Ish. Which is kind of interesting. Here, it's like it's Ayin Taisus. Here he mentions Eishes Ish. Ben B'chayav Ben Le'acham Isas Aviv. Whether the father is alive or dead, Ben Ben Erisim and Nesuin. Doesn't make a difference. Eris and Nesuin is the same. Habal Kalasai. So we said a person who's mezana with his daughter-in-law, chayv mishum kalasai mishum eishes ish, bein b'chay b'noi, whether your son's alive, and bein lacham isas b'noi. You can't have tashmish with this girl ever. So if your son decides to marry a girl, you will never be allowed to have tashmish with her, even if your son dies. Bein ben erisim ben nesuin. Says the Gemara. So Tanya Yehuda Omer im lo haisa imo royal aviv. Interestingly enough, that if, let's say, this woman was not fit to marry your father, so the Isser is being with your mother, not Eishes Av, because she wasn't shaykh to be your father's wife. So my Eloy, what does that mean? So maybe you're talking about where your father wasn't any better than you, right? You're bad enough that you were cohabited with your mother, but your father ended up marrying this woman, which is a chavi krisis or chavi misas basin, which of course is not chal. The kedusha is not chal. So what was that machloikis? You're still chayiv for Eishes Av, even by chayiv misas basin. If it's chayiv misas basin, it's not a marriage. So why would that be called Eishes Av? Holesely kedushin begavo. It's not a kedushin. So it's not a kedushin. It's not an Eishes Av. El Chavi Lavin. Rather, we're talking about a case of Chavi Lavin. And here we already do have a machlokas. Rabbi Huda Savar look Rabbi Kiva the in kedushin taisam b'Chavi Lavin. So there's a machlokas whether a kedushin is typhus by Chavi Lavin, and therefore that could be the machlokas. What is a case of Chavi Lavin? We had this so many times. Look at Rashi. Mamzeres v'nesina. If you marry a mamzeres, which it says lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, so that's a loisa say. Oh, almana kohen gadol. A kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, right? It says it beferish in Parshas Emor. But according to the Shita, not like Rabbi Kiva, says Rashi, the Tasmi Kedushi me'achas ahuva v'achas senua. So in Parshas Kiseitze, we said you have one wife that you love, one that you hate. So he said, well, what does it mean you hate her? It means the Torah hates her, which is Chavi Lavin. But nonetheless, the Torah still calls her your wife. But time Rabbi Kiva hasam afarish loyikach ish es eishes aviv v'savar dianusas aviv v'kasam adaber. He says that when it says do not take your father's wife, it's a nusas aviv. It's dafka, that pasuk is talking about the father who was ma'anis, a woman that was forcefully upon her. And that's how he had a relationship with her. Delav deloyi gala kanaf aviv. Kanaf shira avivhu just means the kanaf that your father saw. Such a situation, it's ein likuchin. So according to Rabbi Kiva, he holds that a mitzvah, an chavi lavin, is not typhus. So now you can understand if you're bal aim, you're definitely chayiv mishum aim. Question is, you're also chayiv Eishes Av. Question is this your wife, your father's wife? It's all totally whether kedushin is typhus or chayiv lavin. So Moshe Bavaisha. So that's the kasha. Isser mitzvah, the Isser kedusha. When it comes to Isser mitzvah, Isser chalutz, the Gemara in Yevamos discusses. So machlok is what this is. And the Gemara chayletzes lo misyavenas. The din is that you can only do chalitza on her, but not yibum. We're not going to allow yibum. So the question is, what exactly does that mean? As we continue to give on the base, the Gemara says it beferish, so I don't need to explain it. The Gemara says like this: Isser mitzvah shnius medivir sofer. So an Isser mitzvah is referring to a shnius arayis. For example, one's grandmother. Right, it's a shnius l'arayis. My karli Isser mitzvah. Why is it called that? Because mitzvah l'shma devei chachamim. It's a mitzvah listen to chachamim. And Isser kedusha is almano kohen gadol grusham chutzol kohen hedget, which is Isser lav. which is Chavi Lavin. So my Karlu is a Kedusha. Why is it Kedusha? T'chsiv, Kedaishim Yilil Keichem. You're supposed to be holy. The Tanya Allah, and we learned regarding this. Yehuda Machlif, Chalufihu, the Machlif, he flipped them around. Which one's a mitzvah? Which one's Kedusha? Which one's mitzvah? But the din is the same. The din is you give chalitza to these women because Me'ikar Hadin, you could technically marry them, but because it's a Durabanan, so we don't, or because it's a lav, and therefore we don't. Chalitza boy. Nonetheless, chalitza is still required. If he's talking down to Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Kiva Svirle, if he tackle also Rabbi Kiva, that Kedusha is not even typhus by Chavi Lavin, so Michti. Chavi Lavin or Rabbi Kiva, Chavi Krisus down, Chavi. It's no different than Chavi Krisus. The Chavi Krisus, Labane Chalitza, V'ibam Dinhu. There's no din Chalitza by Chavi Krisus. So then why would it tell us that it's necessary by Chavi Lavin that you should do Chalitza? That would not be in accordance to the sheet of Rabbi Kiva. So you're right. With the Varav, the Tanakama Karmim Leil Sfirle. According to him, you're right. He would say that Taka, I hold like Rabbi Kiva, therefore you don't do Chalitza at all. But according to the Rabbanan, who said that Kedusha's times of Chavi Lavin, you should only do Chalitza. Kiyos Rabbi Yitzchak, Tani Kidit Nan, Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, Einu Chayiv El Mishum Ha'ein Bovad. So he said, Rabbi Yehuda holds you're only chayav for the mother, but not for Eishasav. For time of Mai, what is the reason for this? Amar Abaye, because the Amar Kol the pasuk says, Imcha he, focusing on the word he, she is your mother, which means that's a miyut. Mishum imo yatam chayim v'yatam chayim mishum Eishasav. Even if it's true, this really. Maybe she didn't do any, it's not an Isser Lav or anything, but nonetheless, the Pasuk says that Imchahi, that by being boil your mother, so the B'shaygig, you're only chayiv for Imoy and nothing else. El Miata, if that's the proper way of making a diak, just because it says Imchahi, so El Miata, Eres Eishes Avicha lo Segala. So what does that mean? Eres Avicha, He mishum Eishes Av, Losegal, Eres Avichahi. So mishum Eishes Av atam. Does that mean you're only chayev because your father's wife? Diyatam chayev mishum imo, but not because of your mother. Why would you not be chayev mishum imo in that case? Ela imo shehi Eishes Aviv. Koi hacha u'maydla. Koi hacha u'maydla. So hashna imo she'enu Eishes Aviv Machayev. It's coming to say Manach like this. By Imoy She'enu Bas Aviv, who's not your father's wife, you're still Chayev. So Eishes Aviv She'enu Imo Machayev, and your father's wife, your mother. So again, this is your father's wife, who's not Imoy, you're Chayev. So you're Chayev in either way, whether it's your mother who's not your father's wife, or if it's your father's wife, even if it's not your mother. Imo shehi Eishes Aviv lo machayim klal. Maybe if it's your mother and it's your father's wife, maybe you're not chayiv at all. Which you would say, well, chayiv doesn't make any sense. So why would you say that? Because in oichim in the din, right? So therefore, this guy is so bad that maybe it doesn't deserve punishment. The Sulu Rabbana Nami Haksiv Im Chahi. So there's no miyut. Elahuma boile likid the Rav Shisha beredu Rav Idi. Rabbi Huda Nami ahum limute Rav Idi. Let's look at Rashi. That b'shai shemaisin l'oinish the imo sheinu eishes aviv, to punish who's boil's mother, who's not his father's wife, to look siv bam demeim bam umashma bein eishes aviv sheinu imo bein shehi imo. Doesn't matter. But imo sheinu eishes aviv, when it comes to imo, which is not your father's wife, as harik sibba eras imcha lo segalo mashma afabi sheinu eishes aviv, even if it's not your father's wife. But maybe there's, according to him, there's a nashar, but there's no einish. That's what that's referring to. So Ahuma boy look at Rav Shisha beredu Rav Idi. El Omer Rav Acha beredu Rav Ika Imekra Ervascha Mishum Erva Achas Atamachayim Yatamachayim Mishum Shtei Ervas. So it's a lashon that you get one punishment for one erva. Miyata again, if that's so we couldn't say the pshat was because imcha he. They only get one punishment of imoy and not eshes aviv. So instead we're going to say because of the pasuk of erva. So one scene. So therefore you only get one punishment of erva for chiv shaygeg of bringing chatas, one chatas. Miyata, which is problematic because the Gemara mentions other cases where the punishments are more than one. And Rabbi who doesn't disagree. Okay, Elamiyata Ervas Kalaskal Sagala Aegis Bin Chahi Lusagalir Vasa. So how can I be Mishum Erva Achas and Machaviata Machayim Mishum Sterish Ervas? I'm saying Mishuyais Shtei Aros. If a person was Mizana with his daughter-in-law, so you're telling me you only get there's only one? But not Abal Kalasai. Again, we saw this in the Mishnah, right? And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree. This is prefer. That's what the Gemara says over here. This is the Gemara's kasha. So there's two punishments over here. And even though it says ervas, but that's not a proper diak to say only one and not two, because we then see when it comes to being mizana with your daughter-in-law, there's two punishments. One is for kalasa and one for eshes ish. Bein machayim benoi, bein lachabisas benoi. No one argues with that. So Rabbi Yehuda can't make that diuk, because if he would make that diuk, he should stand across the board. El kivan dechad gufahu. We have to understand like this: we're dealing with one person. You're mizana with one woman. Avgav the trei isurin in who, even though there may be two isurim, ksiv irvasa. So hachinami kivan dechad gufahu avgav the trei isurin in who ksiv irvasa. So you can say, how could you get two punishments, two chivi katos, when it comes to being boil your imay, even though it's also eshes av, but it's one guf. It's the same thing with your kalasa. Your daughter-in-law, it's the same person. It's one person. So why you chayiv kalasa and eshes ish? Elo amirava ksaver bihuda irvas avicha zu eshes avicha. According to Yehuda, when the pasuk says irvas avicha, that's referring to eshes avicha, your father's wife. That's what it's referring to. Umayslub gzer shava. Umash bein eshes aviv shi imoy. Whether it's your mother, bein eshes aviv she'enu imoy, or even if you're not your mother. So ima she'enu eshes aviv manayin. Tamalim eres avicha imcha lo segala imcha hi mishum imo tamachayv lo mishum eshes aviv. Okay, so look at question 10. We're gonna stop there because it just keeps on going. But that's basically where it ends. Question 10. Ervas avicha lo segala ma b'ma kosma daber. So what is this referring to? When it says the erva of your father do not lo segala. So according to Yehuda, it's referring to eshes av, and according to Rabbanon, it's ervas avicha mamish. It's referring to the erva of your father mamish. But according to Yehuda, it's eshes av. Okay, let's see maybe one more question. Maybe. Question TA2. This may be a hard one. I got half credit for this one. This doesn't seem an easy question. Ezu ereva shehi ereva mishtei shemos komakum chayim rak achas Rabbi Yehuda. So that one we know. That's imoy, right? Imo shehi eshes aviv chayim rak mishum imo. So that's clear. Let me just mark that down. That's TA2. That's very clean. Let's at least see where it says over here. Ervas eshes avicha lo segal. Ervas avicha hi mishum eshes aviv atamachavi mishum imo. I don't want to. That's not really what I wanted. Eno chayiv el mishum aim bilvad. Let's just say that. You're only chayiv mishum aim bilvad. Okay, even though there's also eshes of. And then the question furthermore says, Yal eza achas hu chayiv. Oh, which one are you chayiv? So you're chayiv for eshes of. For ve'eshes aviv, she eshes ish, chayiv rak mishum eshes aviv. Eshes aviv, which is eshes ish, you're only chayiv because of eshes aviv. Okay. It feels like I'm back in Yavamas. Question TB4. No. Question 8. Question 10 we just saw. And that is it. Adka.